when I was in a bodybuilding phase, training with John Meadows, for example. That was over a multi-year period of time. The bench press really wasn't even in the program, and if it was usually the third or fourth exercise of the day. Once you find out where that balance is, then you make the determination based upon, do you need more work capacity? If you do too much, then the working sets are going to feel like crap. So you want to find what that balance is first. Do you have a favorite bench press warm up? Love the channel and the content. I can't see, because this is a screenshot, I can't see who asked it. So do I have a favorite bench press warm up? Yeah, no warm up. For myself, personally, I've tried about everything because I'm messed up, right? So it's fucked up. I'll just say I'm fucked up. So my shoulders are fucked. I got a lot of things that are messed up. So I've tried to do a lot of warm-up stuff. That didn't make any difference. Nothing's really made that much of a difference except shoulder distractions. I like to use a club, whatever they call those things, training clubs, and just bend over and let my arm hang. And as I hold the weight at a certain point, it will start to relax. So the joint will start to open up. Then I'll start circles. That is by far been the best thing. And keep in mind with my, my right shoulder, it's got all kinds of arthritis and bone spurs in there. So just that slight little bit of distraction is just enough to be able to help. And then a boatload of warm-up sets. And this hasn't changed, by the way. So when I'm talking about the warm-up sets on the bench press, this hasn't changed since since the day I walked into Westside the first time for the first bench training session. I'll bench the bar until I feel like I can go up to the next jump, which would be 95 pounds. Sometimes it might be 4 or 5 sets. Sometimes it might be 2, sometimes it might be 10. And then it could be a few different sets with 95 and a few sets I don't make that next jump up until I feel like I'm ready for that next jump up. So the sets are very heavy on the bottom end during the warm up and very light on the top end. So there's not a lot of reps that are being done on the heavy days, the max effort days. There's probably no more than 2, maybe 4 at the most reps over a 90% range based upon that day. And that's probably high for me, as I try to keep it around 2. One actually with a straight raw bench to my chest, I keep it at 1. But then if I put on, a slingshot or something like that, or go to a shoulder saver pad or any supportive type of aid, then to me, that actually moves into the supplemental exercise and isn't really the bench anymore. But there may be 1 or 2 there too. So that's kind of where that variance is with that. When I tried to do all the warm-up stuff first, or when I was in a bodybuilding phase, training with John Meadows, for example, that was over a multi-year period of time. The bench press really wasn't even in the program that much, if at all. And if it was usually the third or fourth exercise of the day. It didn't make any difference on how my joints felt, being if it was the fourth exercise or the first exercise. It probably felt a little worse being later in the program because of the other fatigue that was being accumulated. I'm answering this as it was asked, so what is it for me? What is it for other people? I don't know. That becomes very specific based upon the person. For example, let's say if somebody's max bench is 65 pounds, obviously they're not going to be doing 10 sets with the bar to warm up. So they're going to have to warm up other ways. It can be lighter bars, dumbbells, things along those sorts. So play around with it is what it comes down to. Is sometimes do more warm-ups than what you think you need to do. See how that feels. Sometimes do less. Personally, I think you should be able to do a training session with heavy weights. So say if it's max effort stuff. Personally, I think you should be able to hit that max effort exercise for a maximum with a lot of warm-ups and with very few. So I've done max effort exercises just to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. I need to turn my phone off. I've done max effort exercises that consisted of a total of maybe 100 reps, right around there, including the warm-ups, from, say, I'm not going to count the body weight squats to the box, so I'll count those, including those. So that, then the bar, then kind of moving up from there. With that very same exercise and close to the exact same weight. So it's personally my main max effort exercise for lower body that I try to really push hard for no reason other than this, what I really like, is the reverse band spider bar. So personally, this is an exercise that I would talk about. Sometimes it may be all those warm-ups, like 100 total warm-up reps until I get to that max weight. Other times with the same max weight or a little within striking range of the same max weight, I've done a total of 5 reps. So that's the variance that I'm talking about that I think everybody should try to strive for. So I'm not going to sit here and say that you should be able to, just jump in and hit the max rep with no warm-ups. But you should be able to get there pretty quick if need be. So the reason I've always kind of trained myself to be that way is when I was still competing, there were some meets that hopefully, I think they are a little more organized today to a certain degree, but I do believe they are. There were some meets that I might have had 15 minutes to be able to warm up. And now when you're talking about fucking putting briefs on and a suit on and all that other horse shit that we had to put on, that's maybe 1 or 2 sets. So it's like, fuck, you put your stuff on, take 315, take, 6 something, and then go with your opener. Worst case scenario, but you got to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Other times there was plenty of times for the warm up. So it's the same thing with the bench. There are a lot of times that I needed a lot of bench warm ups in a meet. There were other times where it was, 135 for 5, 225 for a single, put the shirt on and go open at 540, so that's something that you have to prepare yourself for. So getting back to the original question, I try to answer these in depth. That way I'm kind of covering all bases instead of just making one assumption on what this question's supposed to represent. Find a way to test both and test the extremes of both. If you do too few warm-ups, the weight's probably going to feel heavy, real heavy, if you do way too few. So when you start getting into your working weights, it's going to feel like crap. So you're going to know you need to do a little bit more. If you do too much, and then the working sets are going to feel like crap. So you want to find what that balance is first. Then once you find out where that balance is, then you make the determination based upon, do you need more work capacity? For example, or is it, lifters that don't put in the required supplemental and accessory work after the main lift? So do you put that in front as part of the warm up just to kind of make sure it's getting done before the main stuff? So you can just make sure it's done. Things like core work, torso work, ab work, whatever you want to call it, usually is one of those things that gets overlooked or skipped a lot. So you can put it in there as part of that warm up type. When you're dealing with, or if this is asking about specific exercises that need to be done, I'm laughing because it's like, well, what year are you talking about? You know, what 2 years are you talking about? Because the popular warm-up exercises for 2021 and 2022 were different than the ones in 2020 and 2019. You know, so they're trendy. You know, people like to put out the perfect warm-up, and it's all trendy bullshit where it's just how the industry is. So you can always tell, you know, what's the most popular because you see everybody doing it. And then you're like, you know, it's always interesting to me. I can joke or rant about it, you know, if I really get going too deep into this. But some of the exercises are exercises that you haven't seen for 20 years. So then they reemerge, and it's the exercise everybody needs to be doing. It's like, well, if it was that fucking good, it wouldn't have went away after, you know, it wouldn't have disappeared for 20 years in the first place. My point is, try different things, you know, see what other people do, try them, see how it feels, go from that. You know, the objective of training is to be able to figure out what works for yourself and kind of go from there. The next question is, when did you take lifting serious? I trained for sport since I was a kid, right? But I would probably say in 6th or 7th grade, wrestling, there was a universal machine in the locker room, and it was like a leg press, seated overhead press with a weird ass bar stool type of seat, a bench press thing, and maybe a curl. There was 4 stations or 5 stations to the stupid thing, and then we'd have to do it, you know, after practice. So I wasn't serious about it then, and I actually sucked too. So I was getting beat all the time. And it was also a time when I was getting my ass kicked outside of school all the time too. But kind of why I ended up in wrestling for that time period. But after just kind of fucking around with that a little bit, I was stacking everything and nobody else was. And that kind of made me more interested in weight training. And then I believe that Christmas, my uncle gave me a weight set, which was those concrete plastic filled things that was in my basement, and got a book on weightlifting, which I believe I still have out in the office there somewhere. They had a ton of different exercises in it. I don't even know what the thing was called now. I just did every exercise that was in there. So it was a lot. So I was probably doing 30 exercises. I was training for 3.5 hours pretty much every day, because I suppose I just looked at the pictures but didn't actually read the book, and fell in love with training then, but I didn't know what impact it would really have. So I wouldn't even say that was serious. I would just say that I really liked doing it, but I don't know why. I just did. And, but I slowly got stronger doing that crap, where I remember one of my biggest weights lifted was, for some reason, I was in my front yard with the concrete plate barbell thing, because the biggest plate might have been like the size of a quarter that you see now, was on top of milk crates. So not the open end, the closed end of the milk crate. So it was like the grass was the bench and the milk crates were the bench rack, I suppose. Like, again, I don't even know why the hell I was doing this, but I did. And so it was like a floor press that I was doing off stands. So a floor press off stands. And I pressed 300 pounds. And I'm like, this is fucking awesome. This is cool as fuck. And then that's when I started to have more interest. I joined a local Y, and I wasn't there very long, maybe a month or two. During this whole time period, I was a fucking juvenile delinquent. So let's just put it that way. So I was getting into problems, issues, and shit like that. So I don't want to say a complete delinquent, but I went to juvenile court more times than I should have. It was somewhere during this time frame. We're going way back. I mean, we're going back to the fucking early 80s, man. So we're going back. It was during this time that my father knew a person in town that was part owner in Finley Barbell Club, which is where I grew up, and got me in there. And it was a private key club, which was a powerlifting club. And as soon as I went in there and saw those guys, you know, squatting 600-700 pounds and benching 315 for reps and 405, and I was blown away. I mean, it was fucking awesome, you know. So they started helping me out, and I began training for my first meet, which happened when I was 13. I would say in that first meet, I got destroyed because I was in the open category, and we used a round robin system. So there were not flights like you see today. So the bar would start at whatever the opener was. You know, I believe I started, you know, the squats in that meet with like a 375 squat, and then it would go to the next weight, and the barbell would never go down. So I repeated myself. So it'd be 375, I believe, and I did like 400, then 450. So I did all three of my attempts in a row with like a 2-minute, whatever break it was, 2-3 minute break. And then I remember Laura Dodd took her opener somewhere around 500 pounds, 550. And it fucked me up because I knew it was the sport for me. I'm like, I just got my ass fucking destroyed, you know, by everybody. And not only that, you know, this Laura Dodd, who I didn't know at the time, you know, was training at the very, very original Westside barbell under Louie, but was also a multiple world champion. I'm kind of thinking, holy cow, man, if every woman in the sport is this strong, I got a long way to go. But I didn't see it that way. The way I saw it was, if every woman in the sport is this strong, then I'm way too weak. You know, I need to at least be as strong as what they are. And if I'm not, then I'm not trying hard enough and something's wrong with me. So that was probably, after that first meet, was when that switch turned and powerlifting became the most important thing in my life. And it stayed that way for the next 2 or 3 decades. So that's what it took, you know, for me. And then from there, you know, those guys at that club helped me out a lot. You know, they didn't have to, you know, that's going to kind of be a theme that plays into all this. They didn't have to do this. I don't even know if I paid gym dues. You know, I can't remember. If I did, it wasn't much, you know, because I was working as a dishwasher and going to school and playing football and all these other things as well. So I think it was just a token, you know, that they were asking just to keep me committed, which wasn't even necessary, because after that first meet, it's like, I'm here. And then every decision I made after that was revolved around, well, where will I train? So when I went to college, it's like, okay, who trains around here? How strong are they? Do they power lift? Nope, not going there. Does somebody power lift here? Nope, not going there. Do they? Okay, there's a group of lifters here. Okay, who are they? What are they? And this was a much more difficult process than what I'm making it out to be, because I could barely get into college. So my options were extremely limited with that. But even transferring schools that I did 2 times, that was always the first thing. Like, okay, so where's the group of lifters? Where they train? And it wasn't like today, where it was, sometimes you had to drive a couple hours to find a powerlifting gym, sometimes even more than that, you know. And that's just for a regular crew to be a part of. Now, if you wanted to learn from people, you know, as I did, then some of the weekend squatting sessions were sometimes 3-4 hours away. I'd have somebody drive me, you know, or con somebody into wanting to go, and they also negotiate somebody else, try to get them to think that it would be in their best interest to go. And then, oh, by the way, can I come with you? And kind of learn from the best people that way. So it goes back a long ways, and it's kind of still there today. On to the next one. Here we go. All right. Is there anything that you would change during your competitive years? This was, there's another question in here. I should have sorted these out a little bit better. That was kind of the same thing, but a little bit longer. Here we go. And it's from my friend, Brian Carroll. So, what would you implement that you have learned after retiring that you think could have helped you make a 1,000-pound squatting competition? This could be an exercise, an approach, or form. All answers are acceptable except should have trained harder or not as hard. That's a good question. I mean, it's the same question essentially as what this other one is, but this one's worded a little bit differently, because these what would you change type questions, they hit me a little bit different than maybe they hit other people, because I can't, you know, so what's the point of it if I can't? Because I was doing everything that I knew at that time to be the best I could possibly be. I was reaching out to all the best people that I could find to be able to help me get better. So, and it was the first priority in my life. So it's not like when I say I was reaching out to people, I was reaching out to as many people as I could get a hold of, you know, and before getting into Westside, training with as many people that were all-time world record holders, or, you know, legends in the game that most people probably wouldn't know the names now of Bob Wall, George Crawford, you know, and, you know, other ones that were around the Toledo area and even Detroit for that matter. And they helped a lot, man. So I was doing the work, man. I was going everywhere. I was reading my ass off. I was studying everything that I could. And, you know, and as I got better as a lifter, and even after coming to Westside and coming to Columbus, that process never stopped. So it wasn't just Louie, where, you know, I'll touch on that, but Louie is a vital, significant person in my life, and with training probably more so than anybody else. But it didn't just stop there, you know, because there were coaches that were coming in, you know, and I got a degree in exercise science and nutrition. So this is what I love to do. This is pretty much all I fucking study and all I was doing. So I was asking them, you know, I formed a relationship with Mel Siff. I formed a relationship with all these other people. So I wasn't relying 100% on Louie, but I still kind of was, but still pulling in all this. The point that I'm trying to make here is I was doing everything I possibly could do during the competitive years that I could do, and more so than what probably anybody else was doing, just because of the passion for the sport and the passion for the training. So that's why when I get asked questions like this, I did everything. Like, what the hell else am I supposed to do? You know, you have to kind of live that to know what I'm talking about, where I'm coming from there. Brian worded this a little bit differently though, because he's talking about what I learned after. And my last competitive meet, I think it was 2005 or something like that. So I've been around the sport. I've been around top level lifters fuck my whole life, you know, and more so probably after retiring, than before retiring. That's not any kind of dig on Westside, because there were great lifters there. I trained with great lifters, fucking ridiculously strong lifters, crazy fucking lifters. It's, you know, but that was conjugate, right? So everybody was kind of operating from that same system. When I started sponsoring lifters through EliteFTS and going that direction, I started to get exposed to how they were training and what they were doing with their training and how different it was from what a conjugate approach would be. So say it was more a block approach or even a linear approach, or the higher caliber lifters, they don't operate really on any of those approaches. They're operating on their own approach, you know? So that was, you know, the big takeaway is how do you develop your own approach, which is some of the other questions that are in here. With that in mind, knowing what I know now, and Brian specifically asking about this 1,000-pound squat, because my best squat was 940. When I did that one, it was easy, but it was rare. And the reason I'm saying that it was rare is towards the end of my career, I had a shaking problem like you couldn't believe, which I didn't know how to solve. I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know where it was coming from. I had, you know, orthos and people telling me that your back's got herniations and all this other shit, or it's your hips, or it's, you know, I did everything I could try to do to be able to figure that out. And the way that I figured it out was shit, maybe a decade later, training with, actually with JL, when he first started getting into the RPR, was working on me and working on different breathing things. And the way that he was doing RPR at the time, or be activated or whatever it was at the time, I may have been the first person he worked on. It was the most painful shit I've ever had done in my life. It was awful. I never want to repeat that again. It was awful, and it lasted like an hour and a half. So part of this whole thing is I'm trying my best to not let him know it hurts, which was almost impossible. It was impossible to do. He told me to breathe, you know, breathe through my nose first and then breathe through my mouth. And then that helped, right? So I put that together a little bit more the next time I went into squat. That actually was the day after, I believe. And some of his voodoo shit actually may have helped, but the breathing was a huge thing, because before I took my time when I took the weight out and I switched the breathing around. I started to pull everything through my nose first and then a little bit more through my mouth. And it was the most stable I've ever been in my life. And I know now if I hear the plates shaking a little bit, I didn't breathe. I didn't brace, whatever you want to call it, right. And had I known that back then, I would have squatted over 1,000 pounds. There's no doubt in my mind. You know, if I didn't know that, because the strength was there, you know, based upon max effort exercises, other things people were doing in the gym that were the same, I don't want to elaborate on this because I didn't do it, so it makes no difference. But the strength was definitely there for that. But there's no way I would have gotten it out of the rack. So had somebody, you know, gently lowered it on me, you know, in a squat position that was with the knee slightly already bent a quarter of the way down, I probably could have done it, but that's not how the sport works. That first is the biggest thing. So that would be one of them, 100%. The other would be wearing gear in training, which now is, the sport's all raw, but wasn't always the case. When I was at Westside, and the time I was in Westside was, let's just say it's the Dimmerst years. So I was there a little bit before the Dimmerst gym location, when it was a Dimmerst commercial gym location first, then he closed that down. Then he went to solvent. So that's when I came to Columbus, was the very end of that commercial thing, which, I mean, there was an area in the back for the powerlifting, but it to me, it wasn't like a Westside barbell at all. No, the solvent thing was a fucking dump. It was a big dump. Thank God that didn't last long. It was anybody that trained there will know what I'm talking. It was a fucking dump, but it worked, so who cares? It worked, lasted about a year. And then the Demers location was, I don't know how long, a decade, maybe a little bit more. Then when Louie moved the gym to where it is now, I was there maybe a year or two. I'm not too sure. So I see my time at Westside as to be in that Demers location. When we were in that Demers location, we never trained with gear, rarely, ever. I never saw anybody wrap their knees the whole time I was in that Demers location. So we're easily a decade. Never once did I see anybody wrap their knees. Briefs, we would train in light briefs. A bench shirt towards the end, we might have put a bench shirt on once, maybe twice before meet. And that's towards the end. I mean, before all this, we would get the bench shirt, put it on, see if it fit, see if we could touch in it, and then not use the shirt again until the meet. And then if the shirt worked for that meet and you're in the same weight class, there's no reason to use it again until the next meet. Squat suit, the same way. Squat suits never, in the gym with the straps up. When I was there, actually the suit bottoms weren't even used, so I think that hurt us when we got to a meet, because granted, we didn't know any different. So we didn't know, and nobody was bragging about their carryovers. After a meet, nobody was running around saying, hey, I got fucking 400 pounds out of my suit and wraps or briefs and all this. Nobody ever really talked about that. If anything, people were downplaying it. No, I don't get shit out of this. So you don't know, you really don't know what other people are getting until you see them, switch gear, or they go from, this type of suit to this type of suit, or to a poly to a canvas, or whatever was at the time. And then their lifts start going up. And then you start seeing people that aren't stronger than you are beating you, and by a lot, especially on the bench, for me. And it was like, fuck. I don't know why we didn't put this together. I don't know why we didn't put it together. Towards the end, I think, we started putting together. After I left, they definitely figured it out. But most definitely it would have helped had I had more reps in my squat suit, straps up with wraps, 100%. So that would have been something different to be able to put in there. The other thing would be, those two are big. I think those would have taken, I don't want to sit and throw numbers out, but those would have got me well over the number that Brian was asking about, I believe, and I don't think anybody that is a multiplier or has ever competed in a multiply would disagree with that, because the squats, not just I was making, but hell, Louie as well. I mean, he squatted 920 and it looked easy as fuck. He definitely had more. So what would he have squatted, had we used gear more, got used to the gear more, and those type of, who knows? So I'm going to put those two as the biggest thing. Training wise, I think that was pretty well set, just based upon what the max effort lifts were and stuff like that. Obviously there were probably some exercises that didn't really benefit me, that I don't want to say that exactly. There were certain max effort exercises that I don't think helped me at all. And suspended good mornings being one of those, that I never got better at them, but all my other lifts would increase. So that's one indication that tells me this isn't really doing a whole lot for me. If anything, if it didn't stay at whatever the shitty ass number was, 455, if I couldn't do that and it was off that, then I knew something was really wrong, but it should always be there, but it never really went higher than that. I would have pulled those things out, put other things in there, but that may have had more ill impact than just doing them, because we trained as a team. So it's, you're training in a group, so there's a group dynamic that's associated with those years for me, a huge group dynamic, just the competitiveness, the aggressiveness, the tribalness, whatever you want to call it, the teamwork, whatever that was, is a huge factor. And if I'm not doing what everybody else is doing, then you're removing probably the biggest factor that was associated with that time period for me above everything else. So I'm conflicted on that one, because suboptimal as far as what that movement may have been for me, is becomes optimal when you look at more than just the movement, because in training there's more components than just the movement. There's rest periods, there's how the training plan's laid out, how the program's laid out, who you're training with, all these other factors kind of play into that, to where the exercise selection, yes, it's important, but I could debate that it's not as important as most people make it out to be. On to the next question. What's your favorite thing about the S5 compound compared to S4? So for those that don't know, that would be our business location that we're in now compared to the business location we were in previously. The differences there are pretty vast, because the previous location we didn't own, we were renting it, and it was a fucking dump. I loved the weight room, so the move, there are multiple reasons for the move. The first was, it sucks when somebody else is in charge of keeping your building fit, safe, not leaking, all the other kind of shit. When that falls on somebody else's plate, they don't give a fuck about doing it, then you end up paying for improvements for things that you shouldn't be paying for. And if you're paying for them, you should probably own the place. So that was a variable, that was a factor. And then rent increasing was another factor, because it's like, we can have our own fucking place and pay less than what this is. And then instead of just throwing the money away, actually building in the worth of an asset. The third was staff. For instance, everybody was shoved in. We had three offices mainly at the old place. So you had, three people shoved in one office. Another person's desk was in the hallway, and then four people in another office, and 4 or 5 in another office, and another one in a hallway, and another one that was actually a desk in a closet. So it's not the best environment for recruiting staff or even to work in. So for me, the biggest improvement, or thing that I like the most from that location to this location, is having better work environment for staff. 100%. That was what kind of closed the deal, or sold me on the whole idea of this. I'm still getting used to the gym I love the other gym. I love just the dirtiness, rust, fucking possums and bats and birds and all kinds of shit of that place. And it just being a big clusterfuck, and we were there for a long time too. So that part, I'm still becoming acclimated, you know, after all these years to where we are now, which is great. I'm not putting that down at all, but that's the answer there. So on to the next one. What is your favorite episode of Table Talk thus far? I would say it's the ones that I've done. We've done a few with any of them with Wendler are fucking awesome because we got history. We go back a long way. But the ones with Jim, Vincent, and Matt Rhodes are awesome. Those are my favorite ones because those we forget that we're even doing a podcast, you know. So it's just having a good time with people that I've known for a really long time, you know. And that's one of the other things that when we come back into the podcast into season 3, I'm going to go out of my way to have more podcasts like that, you know, with people that I've known for a long time. So it's just kind of sitting down bullshitting, you know. That's when the better stories come out. That's where memories come out. And that's where things come out. Like when the question that I just answered that Brian asked, like knowing what you know now, what would you have done different? What would you have done different with the athletes that you were working with? What would you have done different in your own training? What would you have done different here? You know, dealing with the things that you're dealing with now, what would you have changed if you would have known? All those type of things. That's great conversation when you're speaking to people that have been doing the shit, you know, with the same type of mentality for 20 plus years. You know, there's a lot that comes out of that because there always ends up being a few things that obviously we can't go back and change it, but the people that we help, you know, and help advise, we can change it with them and kind of work, you know, from that dynamic and go from there. So those are definitely the favorite ones. In the last 30 years, what is the longest you have gone without touching a weight? No more than a month. And I have to think about it because my first hip replacement, I was only out of training for maybe 4 or 5 days. And then that was the second hip replacement was not the same story. That one had me in a recliner at home for 3 or 4 weeks. That would have been the longest time period. Then there were other periods of time dealing with other health issues or business issues or time type issues where the training dropped to just say once a week. So there's been periods of time. Normally I'm not going to take off a long period of time completely. Normally what will happen if it's, you know, health issues, surgery or whatever, that starts to really compromise time, I can still find 1 day a week to be able to go in and do what I need to do and to train hard. I've had periods of time where that 1 day a week type of setup lasted more months than I could probably say. 5, 6 months, maybe 4 or 5, 6 months, not a year, but a pretty big stretch. So I was able to maintain what I had during those times. Definitely, no, I don't even want to say that. I was able to maintain maybe 80, 90% of what I had during those times and then bring it back actually bringing it back's been harder. You know, as I get older, it becomes harder after those breaks to be able to bring it back. So that would be the question there. Normally not at all. Because there's movement helps more than not movement for the issues that I deal with. With another passing, does Dave take the time to consider his legacy? Does he know the incredible impact he's had globally on so many people? Legacy is a weird word to me, because I've been asked this before. I don't have any control over that, so I don't give a fuck about that. Think about it this way. Do you know who your great-great-great-grandfather was? Do you know who your great-grandfather was? Do you know anybody? I mean, how many people, how many names can you really think of from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, that still resonates anywhere? There's not many, man. I would bet there's a bunch of younger lifters, bodybuilders, powerlifters, whatever you want to call it, coming up today, in their 20s, teens, even late teens, coming into strength sports. They probably have no idea who Joe Eater was. So you start throwing around the word legacy, nobody's going to fucking remember who any of us are 200 years from now, no matter what the fuck you do. So what's that even? You're just, if you're trying to chase a legacy or leave a legacy, in my opinion, you're losing a lot of what you should be doing now, because you're here now. I mean, we can't change what's in the past, and we can't really totally predict what's in the future, but what we have control of is what we're doing right now. So I don't care about that, and never even put any thought to it. The most important people that should remember me when I pass should be my kids. I'm more worried about that. What are they going to remember? What am I going to leave for them? What values in them will they be able to instill in the values and children that they may have, and so forth, because what gets passed down from generation to generation to generation, if our values, so that has nothing to do with legacy. So I don't get that. I think that, and I understand where it's coming from, and I just don't understand. My brain doesn't work in that context very well, because it just is, and does he know do I know the impact that I've had on so many people? What's that? Again, like, what's that even mean? So I don't know. I with anybody, right? And I'm more public facing than a lot of people, but way less public facing than many more people. And I can tell you right now, there's far more criticism that comes your way than compliments. So what's the impact? Like, what's that mean? So I'm just doing the best that I can do to try to help people lift bigger weights, and, create a company that helps people lift bigger weights, and do everything in our power to try to do this in a way that is free for the people that can't afford it. That's, we talked a little bit about Louie. I talked about those people in the Finley Barbell Club that helped me out. There's a handful of people that took the time to help me when they didn't have to, they didn't need to. I don't even know why the fuck they did, but they did. And every one of them had a huge, significant impact on my life, a huge impact on my life. So my way to pay it back to them is, the live, learn, pass on, which is deep rooted, in me. And that's what the company's for, so there's pros and cons of that. You know, the pros are we can help a lot of people that can't afford it. The cons are we have to rely on other people to buy our products to be able to pay the people to help us get the content out there to be able to do this. So if, you know, the product sales are not good, then we have to put out less content. And the product sales are good, then we can put out even more content. So the frustrating part, I guess, is we're not impacting enough people to be able to put out as much content as what I'd want to be able to put out. So, I mean, that's the driving force. And that's kind of why there's been this effort since 2000, you know, to kind of break down the content all the way to like starting grounds and then build it back in a different way to be able to have it expand exponentially over a period of time. You know, as I'm working on a 3-year template, you know, that was laid out back then, and we're on path, you know, we're definitely on track, but, and it's going to get better, but it's hard, man. It's hard when you're trying to do this and give it to people for free. You know, it'd be much easier if we were selling content, or I had online training services, or online coaching app or some shit like that. Obviously the profitability would be way higher than I'm making on, you know, in retail. It'd be able to scale a lot better, but how the fuck do I help those people that were like I was when I was that 13-year-old that went in that gym? They can't afford that stuff. You know, so that's where my driving force comes in is, yes, I love helping people that could easily pay, you know, for online programming and all this other kind of crap, you know, but those are not the people that I'm trying to reach the most. The people that I'm trying to reach the most are the ones that need this the most. And like I did, and it will change them. You know, it will change the trajectory of their entire life. There's no way I can fucking sleep at night knowing that I missed the opportunity to perhaps help somebody that's in that range now and going through that if we can expose them to strength sports in any way, bodybuilding, powerlifting, just strength training in any way, to be able to help them, you know, get better, get stronger, get better at their sport, deal with life, whatever it's going to be. I want to do that, and I'm driven to do that. And each day I get more and more, not each day, each month, each little piece of adversity that comes through the business drives me fucking more to do that. And the reason, one of the biggest drivers for it is more and more people are not doing it. You know, as the industry has changed, more and more people will not take the time to help anybody for fucking free at all, you know, and services are being sold to fucking beginners that don't even need it. They just need a program. So there's a lot of really frustrating shit out there that drives me, because as all that grows, which is great for the people that are doing it, as all that grows, it's going to grow their income, it grows their popularity, it grows all this, but who the fuck is taking the time? I'm just repeating myself, but you get where I'm going with that. So if that, I don't know how I got off on that. I mean, it's not really the legacy or how many people. So I guess globally, I don't give a fuck how many people we help. What I care about is, does this trickle down to helping the right person at the right time when they need it? That's what I care about, right? Most of the time, that person is not in a position to be able to afford it. And they're not going to reach out to somebody and say, hey, look, can you help me out? They're not going to do it. People in gyms no longer fucking help other people out. You know, people online no longer want to help other people out. So it's just, though they will as a sales lead, you know, so they'll dangle a little string, help them a little bit, and then here, pay me for this. You know, fuck all that. That's not me. That's not how I operate. Does it mean that the company grows slower? Yes. Does it mean that it's harder to build the content? Yes. Does it create additional struggles and adversity associated by doing this? 100%. Have I grown up under adversity? 100%. That's what I fucking know. That's where I thrive. So I have no problem with it. It's just a matter of figuring it all out. On to the next one. Man, these are all kind of going this. What is the hardest lesson you've had to learn as a father of somebody who has special needs? There was another question on this list somewhere asking about fatherhood as well. The question in regards to fatherhood overall would be, what have I learned from that? Patience would be one thing. The special needs part is, I used to think I had to look at it differently than, say, my other son. It's the same. You know, it's, you're trying to, you want to provide the best future that you can, but you can only predict so far into the future. Now with, you know, a son that's on the spectrum, being able to predict further, you know, in the future, like, you know, will he be able to drive? Well, and, you know, all those questions that when he was younger, you know, how will he be able to go to school? Will he be able to drive? You know, fuck the driving, just school. Was he going to be, that was the big one, you know, is he going to be able to progress, you know, from year to year? Is what, you know, is he going to find something that he's passionate about, something that he loves to do, you know, things like that. And then will he be able to drive? Will he be able to get a job? You know, is he going to be able to go to college? Is he going to be able to function in a more social environment? You know, all these things, they're cloudy, but I don't think, personally, I think I made it more cloudy than it should be, because I didn't know any of that shit with my other one either. You know, so you don't know. I mean, you can make the assumptions that, you know, every child's going to grow up, graduate from high school, drive, you know, and do all these quote unquote normal things, but you don't ever really know that for sure. I mean, you only know so much, you know. So what I learned from having one son with special needs was, everybody's potential is going to be different, but it shouldn't be based upon what's perceived as a limitation. So where am I going with this? So with both of them, you want to push them, you know, outside of their comfort zone so they learn, so they get better. You know, then when you do that, you know, maybe sometimes you push a little bit too far, then you got to dial it back, you know, and try to keep moving it forward, you know, a little bit with each, you know, and it's no different, you know, if their special needs are not. Now, that could change, you know, based upon different physical limitations. You know, if they're nonverbal, you know, there's a whole spectrum of different special needs, I'm sure, but you figure it out. So that's my advice that I have for, you know, other parents that might have kids that have special needs that are on the spectrum, is don't freak out. You'll figure it out, you know. And there's a whole different pieces of advice on navigating things like school systems and, you know, all this. There's a lot more bullshit that you need to navigate and speak up for and speak up about, or to fight for, that you don't have to deal with on the other side. But on the other side, it's it's still kind of there, right? Because, you know, schooling is the biggest thing where, you know, might come off the wrong way, but most teachers just don't give a fuck. So the sooner you realize that, the better off you're going to be, because then you can, you know, take more accountability and responsibility to make sure that they're being taught the way that they should be taught and what they should be taught. In other words, some do, you know, I don't want to sit there and say all don't. Some do, but it's rare. But if they see that you give a fuck, and this works both ways, I believe, if they see you give a fuck, then they're going to care more about wanting to help your kid. Because I'm sure there's a ton of parents out there now that just don't give a fuck, you know, so kind of goes both ways. So that's the advice I'll just give there, and just stop with that, is you need to be willing to speak up, fight, and advocate, you know, for your child, no matter if they're saying you're wrong, you do whatever the fuck you're right, what you think's right, because it's their developmental years and it's your child. You know, nobody else is going to give a fuck, you know, so it's up to you to be able to figure that out. Need to get into some training stuff, man. In order to gain traction on social media and YouTube, do you need to be jacked, wicked strong, doing something crazy before people start listening to your good information? Dude, I don't fucking know. I mean, look at our following. I've been on YouTube for 15 fucking years. We still got like 132,000 followers, which I'm not bitching about. It's taken 15 years to get it. So I don't know what the secret of it is. We try to grow it the best way that we can. I would say that, you know, if somebody's trying to build this to become, you know, a solid income stream for them, good luck, man. You know, listen to the other people out there, you know, do a deep dive in all of it and see what happens. I mean, other people have done it, which means that you can do it as well. It becomes a little bit different, you know, as a company when, you know, you have to pay people. So I don't know what context this is coming from, because if it's, you know, just a person and you're just doing it because it's a hobby of yours and it's on your own, there's no real expense except your time. You know, now if it's a company trying to put this out and they have a content team, then, you know, you're going to be paying 2 or 3 people, you know, so immediately out of the bat, you need to be generating enough revenue to cover 2 or 3 salaries for that. And if you don't, it's going to be way more work, you know, on you, which could take away from other things that you should be doing to be able to grow the business. So if YouTube has not helped grow the business much at all since we've been on it. So, and that's tracking, you know, the YouTube revenue, and it's also tracking the sales that we get from YouTube to the site. And that's, I mean, there's also a consideration that 41% of our YouTube demographic doesn't live in the United States, which, for the way our company operates, eliminates all those people as potential customers anyhow. So it's actually probably when you look at the expense that goes into it, the time that goes into it, you know, after, I don't know which is more expensive, the podcast or YouTube. Probably our most expensive network, where my goal has been to be able to at least get it, you know, the YouTube revenue to be able to pay for just one person, you know, and we're getting there, but then that's kind of how I look to scale it. But one little change in an algorithm and that can drop tremendously, you know, so then you're down to how you're going to pay these people if that drops, and that's what you're using to, you know, support them. So does it help if you're these other things? I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of wicked, strong, crazy, what's the other thing? Jacked people who have channels now that have just quit doing anything with it because after 4 or 5 years, it just have no traction. So there's there's definitely more to it. You can have all this and have a great personality for YouTube. You can have all the right mix to be able to do that. But then if you don't understand the editing, how to create thumbnails, the positioning, posting, there's a lot of other things associated with that. If you don't understand all those things, it probably isn't going to do shit for you either. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask on that. You probably want to ask people that have like 500,000 or 1 million followers to be able to see, but I don't know. I mean, that's just my advice there. Training question. Here we go. How important is lifting to failure for hypertrophy and strength? Is lifting to failure more important to one type than another? So how important? So yes, I'm going to come out here first off and say training to failure for strength is not a good idea. So I'll elaborate a little bit more, but let's break this into two parts. So for hypertrophy, so bodybuilding and then strength. For hypertrophy, I do think that training to failure is important, but to put this in more context, I think training to failure is important to a certain degree. What percentage of time? I don't know. I don't think that's the bigger factor at play here. I think it's more important to know what failure is. So there's a lot of, I see, and this gets into the RPE and all this kind of shit. I see it as different things. So say you're doing a set of, I'll use an exercise everybody knows, a set of barbell curls, very simple thing to go failure on. And you're doing strict sets. So, and you're controlling the tempo. So you're controlling the speed on the way down, speed on the way, so it's a controlled tempo. So you're not heaving anything, just controlled muscle action that you're doing. So say, 2-3 seconds on the way up, 2-3 seconds on the way down, maybe even longer. So 3 to 4 seconds on the way up, 3 to 4 seconds on the way down. And you don't break that technique or that tempo. And you just do that in that style. At a certain point, you're going to fail. At a certain point, the rep's going to begin to slow down, and then you're just not going to be able to get another rep. To me, that's failure. Now, at that point, somebody could, or even halfway through. So say they do the first 3 or 4 reps that way, then they start putting a little body English into it, start heaving a little bit more, and they get 3 or more reps. They're not completely cheating, but they get 3 or more reps, then they go to failure then. That's failure 2. It's different than failure 1. The other one could be they just cheat rep every single one of them, and then they go to failure there. Then, or another would be they do them really strict, and then when they get to failure there, they start heaving them up, doing cheat reps after that. Failure there. So what do you mean by failure is the first thing. So I just gave 4 really simple examples, and that's not including the hybrids of all that. Say you do 2 cheat reps and you do 1 strict rep, 1 cheat rep, 1 strict rep. I mean, there's a lot of different tempo changing things that you can do, form changing things, mechanical drop sets. There's all different things that you can do that kind of push a little bit further. What you need to be able to learn, in my opinion, again, is to fail with constant tempo and tension, to know what that is. And then failure is important for you to know what it is. That's all I'm trying to say here. So once you know what it is and whatever style that you're using, if it's heaving it, super strict, whatever it's going to be, that failure is going to be a little bit different with that weight, different reps, whatever that's there. Once you understand where that is, failure is not important. What then what I would say is you want to go 1 rep shy for hypertrophy of that failed rep. So you shouldn't, let's say you're 1 rep shy of that to me, that's failure, because you wouldn't have got the other one. So that's where most of that training should happen, 1 or 2 reps shy of failure. And that's also based upon the volume that's put in front of you. So if it's 20 sets, 30 sets, 6 sets, whatever it's going to be, if it's 30 sets, then not every work set's going to be to where I'm saying. So however you're going to plan that training day out, maybe some of the earlier ones are going to be 2-3 reps shy just to be able to build the volume up. Then some of the later ones you're going to start going to failure on. And then, you know, over a period of that phase or that cycle, more and more of those sets end up being pushed to that higher fatigue threshold than what you started. So say, I'll keep it simple. Say you're using the exact same program, the exact same exercises, sets and reps, whatever it's going to be for that day. Then over a period of time, let's say it's 20 total sets, and you start out with 20% of them being work sets that are 1 rep shy of failure. Then over a period of whatever that phase is going to be, you work that from that 20% to 30% to 40%, 50%, 60%. So you work it up that way as far as the work sets, and then you would phase out and go into some other different type of training phase. That's just one way to kind of look at that from the hypertrophy point. If all you're doing is training 3 or 4 reps shy, you know, of failure, I don't want to say you're not going to get any benefit from that, because it's definitely better than nothing. But your progress could probably be better on the other end of that. The other thing with this is, I just lost my train of thought. The other end of this hypertrophy type training here is, it may vary based upon exercises. Some exercises are a little bit harder to be able to keep that tension that I'm talking about, or constant rep speed, or how you fail. And so the follow-up question here would be, should they all be strict set? Should they all be full range of motion? Should none of them be loose? Should none of them be cheating? Should none of them be partial range? I don't think there's any really right or wrong, because it's going to come down to, you know, their individual specificity. So there's going to be that. Do different things, because there's another factor associated with this, that if you think something's going to work better for you, it probably is going to work better for you. You know, if you're not too sure, or if you kind of doubt what you're doing, it's probably not going to be as optimal for you. So if you like something, it's probably going to be more important. If you don't like something, you know, a lot of parts of training suck, you know, so you kind of won't like those things, but that's kind of a given. But there has to be a balance with the things that you do like. It kind of goes in there. Now, when we're talking about straight strength, you're talking a lower repetition threshold. So I mean, you're talking 1, 3s, 5s, and you're also talking greater demands on recovery because of the heavier weights and the 1s and 3s and 5s and stuff like that. With that, I would try to stay as far away from failure as you possibly can. I'm not saying that everything should be easy. It should be hard, but, you know, definitely a couple reps shy of failure for sure is going to come into that, just because of the recovery demands that are associated. But now once you get off of that main lift and you get down deep into the accessories, that other stuff can come back in with that. So I don't know if I'm really answering this to the way that y'all want it to be answered, because it's kind of it's like anything, right? It's one of those it depends type of answers. So I'm just giving you different ideas and thoughts on how to approach it, how to think of it outside of this absolute, because you're trying to work off something that's not even defined in the first place, which is failure. right? So that word failure to you or to me, to somebody else, to this person, to that person, it could all be different. So before we can even start talking about how close you should be to failure, or if you could go past failure, we need to come to an agreed definition of what that means for who that person is and where they are in their training as well. It's going to be much harder for a beginner to really determine what that is than somebody that's been doing it for 10 years. Somebody that's been doing it for a decade and is really in touch, with how things are supposed to feel, how to contract and how to move with weight and with load. Going back to that same barbell curl, I could take somebody who's very in touch with how to flex, how to move, how to contract, how to keep constant tension, how to create more tension, and give them, let's say they could normally barbell curl 120 pounds for 10 reps. I could give that same person, a dime per side. So say 65 pounds and say, I want you to fail somewhere between 10 and 12 reps. So I don't care how you do it. All I want is to see that bar not be able to move by the time you get to 12. They could do that. Now they may have to use an extremely slow tempo. They may have to use, hold it at the top, flex really hard. They may have to use, a pausing, ISO holds, but they will be able to use that 65 pounds and get to that failure threshold. So in examples, that compared to a beginner that has no idea how to do any of these things, we're talking two entirely different people, and how to program, how to organize the training. And that needs to also be accounted for as well. On to the next one. All right, going on the events on the Arnold Strongman Classic. JF Karen's injury. How do you deal with severe injuries after 40? I imagine there is some difference in approach to injuries if you look at guys age 20 or 30 or guys who are closer to 50. Any pointers on recovery for older lifters? I've noticed there's a difference the older I've gotten on recovering, 100%, especially compared to when I was 20, and 30. But my best competitive years were closer to 35, 37, 38, I believe. So it's recovery was starting to become an issue there. 40s, it changed a little bit, 45, 50. There's a lot of factors that play into this when you're talking about recovery and injuries with age, because there's a lot of variables. I'm sure there's aging variables that are associated with this, with hormones, TRT, hormone balance, all this other kind of stuff, which kind of plays into that. But even with that, it's still, after a certain age, and it's a little different for everybody. 40 might be a little too young, for what you're talking about. Most of the time I'm seeing it in people, they're closer to 50 where it starts to become a little different. So one of the biggest things that I think happens related to what's specifically being asked here is, as you get older, say 45, 50, 55, whatever, and you start to have old person health issues or, bigger injuries, bigger layoffs, things that set you off training for longer periods of time. So as I said earlier, I'm always in the gym. That doesn't mean that the training is good. It just means that it's kind of like maintenance thing, because you have a major surgery that's it knocks you down a little bit. And I've noticed it has some impact on your ability to recover. Because if you're training solid 3-4 days per week over a period of years and years and years, and then you get smacked, and then for some reason you're only making it in once a week, then as you come back and you start building that volume back up again, your general physical preparedness drops, your work capacity drops. Your strength may come back really quick, but that work capacity and all the other stuff still hasn't, your base still hasn't come back up. So one of the issues that happens is that base kind of gets forgotten about, because as you start to come back up again, you're starting to feel your strength come back on the things that you like to do the most. You're like, okay, cool, I'm coming back. Muscle memory is working. All this stuff is working. But you forgot that, you know, for years you were training 4 or 5 times per week. Now you're only training once or twice per week. That's still going to have some deconditioning impact on the work capacity, general physical preparedness. And those are the things that help with recovery more so than what people think it does, because it's your ability to circulate nutrients, to circulate blood, circulate recovery, all those things. So that gets pulled away, and then you start going back into these strength phases without bringing that back up again. What happens over a period of time, because I've seen it with so many people now, it's a slow, gradual process that 3-4 years into this, then, you know, they're not recovering. You know, because for whatever reason, the work capacity just hit. It's unnoticed at the very beginning, or not that noticeable, but years down the line, that crosses a line, I suppose, to where it matters now, and now you're getting hit with it. And so how do you deal with it, right? Is to understand that part of that, first off, if you're injured at that point, then yes, I think that's important to, you know, keep the strength up, you know, with the things that you can keep the strength up with. It's also important to keep your work capacity and your base up. Actually, it would be a better time to try to build that work capacity and base. Sometimes it might be difficult, especially if you're talking about, you know, a lower body type injury. So there's going to be more time off. So it's hard to walk, you know, great distances for a couple weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, after a hip replacement, for instance. But that has to come back up, and it has to be on the radar at all times. That's not saying that there can't be times, because all your training should be phasic. That's going to help eliminate a lot of this as well. So there should be phases that are going to focus more on building work capacity and the conditioning that we're talking about here. And then you can, if you want to really push that strength phase that you're in, as long as that work capacity is at its base, you can start to drop it a little bit as you try to peak on whatever you're peaking with. You know, if it's a powerlifting meet, strongman event, you can start to drop some of that out depending upon what you're training for, to help kind of get more peak, where super compensation peaking is more so than the super for whatever that is. You can pull it out then, but it has to be there before you pull it out. So that would be the difference that I see and it becomes a little bit harder, you know, as you get older, because there's more responsibilities. So it's a little different. Who is the lifter that you have seen make the most progress of all time? Big jumps from novice to pro. The person that comes to my mind with that is Rob Fusner. He trained with us during the time I was at Westside. I don't know how he got there, and I'm not too sure, you know, who brought him in, but he came in and he was strong. I mean, he was commercial gym strong, you know, typically where people were before they came in. And then, good God, within a year, went from like commercial gym strong to fucking all-time world record type shit. It was crazy. I mean, it was great to see, but it was also frustrating as hell because he was in my weight class and went from, I don't want to say zero, but kind of went from like zero to hero in no time. And it's just unbelievably fucking strong, how strong he was. His first meet, the great story about first meet that he did, and the warm-up room during the rules clinic, he asked the head judge who was given the rule clinic at the time, and he was serious, what lift is first? Which is, and then he went on to total over elite, so first meet, he didn't even know what lift was first, which is kind of fucking funny. But, and then went on to total over elite there and then just took off over there. I've seen other people do crazy stuff like that when I was at Westside, but this one jumps out the most, probably because I was more aware of it. He trained in the morning crew with us. He was in my weight class, so it's right there kind of in front of my face. It also frustrated the shit out of me, pushed me a little bit more as well. But that would be my answer to that one because it just comes to mind immediately. How do you choose recovery modalities and phase them? You have meet prep recovery, post-meet recovery, off-season recovery. Do you modulate volume of recovery work? Yes, I do. Something that Mel Siff taught me, or was a discussion I had with him. We did a few clinics together in his place, and one night we stayed up fucking almost all night because this was during the ass end of my competitive career, and I was dealing with recovery issues. Mostly, we would dynamically squat on Fridays and then max effort squat deadlift on Mondays. It was hard, turning it around for that Monday. So that was a big one. From that Monday to the Friday, not that big of a deal, but that was a big one. And then the compounding injuries over years, the shoulder and stuff like that was playing into that. So the most important thing I think I pulled from that conversation is there's a lot of different recovery modalities. There's passive, there's active. I believe that Mel Siff has a book on that. I also believe that Renaissance Periodization has a book on recovery modalities. I think they have it in ebook version and paperback. I have both, and they lay it out. So it doesn't take a deep dive to find out there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different recovery modalities, therapies, so forth. Some are more expensive than others. Some are passive, some active, some are, things that you can do yourself. Some things are, you have to hire somebody to be able to do. So there's all those factors that come into play. The good thing that comes into play with that, though, is if you're broke ass poor, you can still find recovery modalities that you can do. Hot, cold contrast showers, for instance. So there's different modalities that you can have in there. Then there's other ones that, will be a little bit higher. The way that Mel explained it to me and the way that I moved forward with it was experiment during your non-meet phase. So say your meet phase is 12 weeks out or 16 weeks out. Outside of that phase is what I would call, some people call off season. I call it more experimental time because you can try different things. And if it doesn't work, no harm, not a big deal. It's not like you have a meet in 3 months. So that's when I would try different recovery modalities just to see what type of impact they would have. So maybe on one training session, I would push extra hard to knowing that it would create more muscle soreness than normal. And then that next day, try an active recovery modality like backward sled dragging, upper body sled dragging, or hot tub contrast with shower or wet sauna, cold shower, dry sauna, wet sauna. It just rotate different things. Just there's a lot of different combinations of things that you can do. I was working at a trainer at a health club, so I had access to a lot of different things right there to be able to play with. And I found some things for me worked way better than other things. As soon as I found that it worked really, really, really well, I pulled it and never used it again. The only time I used it was during that 12-week meet prep time period. And then I would hold off on using the very best ones until I really, really needed it later into the training cycle. So I would call that gold, you know. So in the off season, or the not that, I was panning for gold, you know. So I was looking for gold. Usually I'd find one or two things that were really, really good, and 5 or 6 things that were probably a waste of time and a waste of money at that time for whatever I was going through there. Then I would pull out, and it's the same thing now. So what you don't want to do is fall for the bullshit, right? Where, I mean, we've all heard it, right? So let's say you say, I want to try RPR, or I want to try stem cells, or I want to try, trying to think about things, a hard massage therapy, like Rolfing type of thing, or ART, something along those lines, or any of those things that are there, or dry needling, cupping. I mean, there's so many different things, ultrasound, you know, all this shit. So there's all this different stuff. The point I'm trying to get is, as soon as you say that you want to try something, I guarantee somebody's going to tell you, oh, that shit don't do anything. Maybe not. But, you know, it's very fucking ignorant to me for somebody to tell somebody else, no, that's not going to do a fucking thing. It's just a waste of time, when you're not in that person's shoes and you don't know what they think. So let's say this person's right. And I've heard this so many times that make your head spin. That's worthless. That's worthless. That's worthless. That's worthless. But they always have the fucking answer. But all the other stuff that they don't do, that's worthless, but they're the answer, right? Which also means anybody that's doing all that other stuff is going to look at them, say that's worthless, but they have the answer. So let's assume that they're all right and that none of it does anything worth a fuck. If the person thinks it's going to work, or you think it's going to work, there's a placebo effect right there that works. So that's how I kind of look at that, is if you're interested in it and you think it's got possibility, then try it, you know, see what it is. A lot of the stuff probably isn't going to help at all. It's like supplements. Most of them don't do shit, but unless you try certain things, you're not going to know. I mean, that's part of the whole process. As long as it's not killing your bank account, it's not putting you in debt, what do you really have to lose? You know, so now when you're in that more important prep time, actually, I'll step back on there and say that, you know, if you're really, really, if you're serious about your training and it's one of your top priorities, I mean, way up there as far as priorities, then you're already doing this. And if you're not, then you're not serious about your training. You know, it's kind of one of those things in there. So you're going to find that most of the stuff, you really can't tell if it made a difference or not. Every now and again, you're going to find something that makes a difference. Now, that could be a placebo difference. It could be just a timing difference. You know, it's maybe you were going to recover anyhow. This just happened to be a correlation, not causation, that was in there. It's fine as well. So, but recovery is the important thing. So use the off season to be able to play with that. It's also the time to play around with different supplemental type exercises to see if they push a lift a little bit more than other ones. Then you want to pull those, save those for that time period as well. Who would you like to have on the podcast that you haven't had on yet? I touched on that a little bit earlier. And who I'd like to have on the podcast would be you guys. You know, just the average person that's listening and that's trying to get better. You know, that's who I want on the podcast. You know, that way it's in depth to just whatever that person is. So that's that. I don't give a fuck about famous people or anything like that. To be honest, I don't give a shit about that, you know, unless it's going to, you know, if it can bring in a bigger audience that could get more of those people that need that help that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, I can see that, but that's a different purpose than that other one. Already talked about that one. The biggest takeaway and lessons that you learned from your time at Westside, more specifically, what was the most valuable lesson that you learned from Louie? There's a lot. This one's weird because I'll answer some things about it, but I'm not really keen on trying to use somebody's passing as a way to get clicks, hits, and traffic. I think that's bullshit. And it's hard to watch other people do it. You know, after somebody that you were very close to for so long passes, you know, then you see, and so I don't know if I'm at a point where I want to sit down and say, okay, here's the tribute to, you know, Louie Simmons at this point, because right now, and since he's passed, is that time period where everybody's trying to maximize clicks, hits, and shit for their own benefit. And that's not about, that's fucked up. In my mind, it's just fucked up. You know, they think it's respectful. They think I don't see it that way. I see it as you're trying to leverage something, you know. Anyhow, just to answer the question, most valuable lesson, there's there isn't one. I mean, is a complex relationship, right? So I probably first met him in the mid to late 80s. No, yes, because he would be in the warm-up room of some of the meets I was in when I was competing, and that's kind of what led me to coming to Westside. And then, like I said earlier, the time I was at Westside was the span of the whole dimmer time period. So I think it's like 13, 14 years, something like that. I guess what I'll say for now is if it wasn't for Louie, there would not be an EliteFTS. That's a fact. You know, so there's a few reasons for that. The first was I was helping him while I was there, still working as a trainer, doing the seminars, and then would go on the consulting gigs or whatever you want to call it with him for many years. But then he just got fucking tired. He just got tired of doing it, didn't want to do it anymore, and just told me to do it. So that was kind of the start there from that side. The next one would be when I first got a computer. I mean, we're going back, like some of you guys listening to this had a computer your whole entire life. The first time I got a computer was after I graduated from college, you know, so my brother put together a computer out of spare parts. So I log on, you know, the internet and the old dial-up type shit. And of course, if I'm searching, you know, Westside barbell conjugate, stuff like that. And I found, you know, a website that was doing a Q&A called deepsquatter.com, which was Jason Burnell. And he had some stuff on there from Louie. He was, I don't want to say copy and pasted. He was posting some of Louie's articles and, you know, just doing his best to answer some questions. And a lot of the stuff that I was reading wasn't really what we were doing. So then I went in the gym that next day and told Louie, about this. And he said, well, why don't you just, email them and tell them what the fuck they're supposed to do? And so, I did that. And so that was bringing the conjugate method, Westside method, online. And that was the start of what became our Q&A, which was the first page that we launched, which was a forum type of page, just dealing with Q&A shit in regards, pretty much all of it in regards to what we were doing at Westside at the time. And I was still there. So it was exactly what we were doing, which is what Louie wanted me to put out there. Just tell them everything that we do. Don't hold anything back. Tell them everything. So moving forward from there, my wife was training in the night crew. I was in the morning crew. She was fed up with her job at that point in time. We had founded a business for my personal training and she was going to try to do something with the training side. Because I was working as a personal trainer and I moved to an independent contractor from employee, so I could try to leverage, so I could try to build a business for one thing. And at that time, it was going to be more the seminars and the consulting was kind of what I was thinking at that time, but then realized I wasn't going to be able to make anywhere near the same as what I was making as a trainer. So that wasn't a good path. She's in the gym complaining about her job. And then Louie said something about, well, why don't you just sell the shit that I have? Because he was selling accessories, things like the man array, bar attachment, squat bar attachment, safety squat bars was another one. And there was sleds, sled straps, a squat belt, which was, oh my God, that was terrible. And a handful of other items that we didn't have money for. So he gave us everything that he had on consignment, gave us all the contacts that we had, and basically told us how to go about, ordering it, payment terms, all the other type of things. So we took that stuff off of his plate and we're selling his videos as well. So that's the fourth part, so there's all these different factors that kind of play into this that created EliteFTS. So, and nobody would deny that. That's been around for that whole time period, that he played a significant role. And not only that, but also in the earlier years, which were hard. I mean, there was a decade maybe that we didn't pay ourselves. I mean, it was a long time until there was any real revenue generated to be able to hire anybody. Then revenue generated to pay ourselves. We were paying other people before we were paying ourselves for years. And so he was referring people. I mean, he was a significant part of all this. So what's the most valuable lesson that I have is when I said earlier that there's a handful of people that came in my life. The handful of people that came in my life made a significant difference. He is one of them. And I'm talking less than 5 people. And he's why I do what I do. This whole live, learn, pass on thing, he's a big part of that. Huge part of that. So I don't know if that's a lesson. I don't know if that's a lesson or not. It's bigger than that. So I'll just stay with that for now. Can address the other stuff later when it comes to that. But I would say I'm trying to think of something that's going to be more relatable. Damn, there's so many different things. You know, I mean, there's a big, you know, that big one, right? Then there's so many other ones that, you know what, I would say here's another one. To not give a fuck about what other people think. And I understand that sounds abrasive, but I'm talking about the critics and all the other kind of stuff. Is I can remember many times where, you know, Jim and I would see something online and then we'd say, hey man, Louie, you know, so-and-so saying this bullshit about you. And he's like, who the fuck is that? And I don't want to mention any names, but it would be somebody that everybody knew, you know, in the strength and conditioning realm. He didn't fucking have a clue who these people were. And so we'd say, well, he's saying this, and this. And then his default was always going to be, well, what's he fucking squat? What's his best squat? What was his best squat? What did he ever do? And then he just didn't give a shit. You know, it was so indifferent to all that crap that's a lesson there, because I didn't start getting hit with that until, you know, a few years into the business. And then more so after that, he just realized they're just fucking trolls. You know, they don't mean anything. But the funny part with him was, you know, it always came back to, well, fuck them. What do they squat? You know, which was a funny ass thing. All right. So if I had a sudden change of heart and fell in love with the with the deadlift again, what would be your top 3 to 5 accessory exercises? What do you think that you would, and what do you think about the recent all-time world record deadlift from last weekend? The all-time world record deadlift from last weekend is awesome to see. Love to see anybody break all-time world records. I don't give a fuck who it is. It's impressive. What else can I say? You know, congratulations. It's fucking awesome. Keep raising the bar. Perfect. You know, nothing bad to say about it. Not at all. Keep pushing that shit up. If, you know, I fell in love with the deadlift again, which won't happen, you know, what would I do different with that? I mean, the default answer would be, well, I would deadlift more. I'm not going to say that, because the part of the reason why I hated it is I had a hell of a time recovering from it. And it didn't just fuck that up. It fucked up everything else. So I just kind of came to the conclusion, if I had to train this more to get 50 pounds more on this, it's going to take 100 off my squat and, you know, 50 off my bench. Fuck it. It ain't worth it. Plus, in a competitive environment, I found myself most of the time having to pull, not pulling what I wanted to pull, but having to pull what I needed to pull to be able to place higher, you know, so that kind of dictated it more so. That's probably part of the reason why I don't like it, because it wasn't like the other ones where you're trying to stretch, you know, and reach these PRs and all the other stuff, because I wanted to place higher, you know, I wanted to rank higher. I wanted that. The whole thing was about that. It's about a PR total and all the other kind of stuff, where I couldn't justify my mind coming into the deadlift and knowing that if I pulled X, I could have that PR total by 5 pounds or 10 pounds, compared to, well, if I try to pull, you know, Y, then yeah, my PR total might be 50, 75 pounds higher. But if I don't pull it, I'm going to walk away with, you know, 20 pounds under PR total. And I've done that, and that sucks, because that right there fucking weighed on me all the way until the next meet. And that could be a long fucking time, especially on the back end of an injury. It could be just 1 meet a year or 2 meets a year. And you know, 6 months of being pissed off because it was 20 pounds under. I'd rather have, you know, a deadlift 30 pounds, 40 pounds under maybe what I could have pulled to not feel that way, because that was fucking terrible. So what I would have done differently is rotated in good mornings more frequently instead of, I mean, they rotated in a lot, but it basically rotated in is a submaximal exercise to replace a max effort exercise once every 4 or 5 weeks. It was never put in there as like a supplemental. I would have put that in more as a supplemental exercise. I would have done more demo type deadlifts or just high rep deadlifts. So sets of 15 to 20 on the deadlift, assuming that my technique is on point. My technique's on point. That's not even in the discussion, because then I'm just reinforcing bad technique. So getting the technique right and on point is going to be the first thing. And then maintaining the body weight that's going to be equal to the leverages that I have at that time while I'm dialing in that technique. Because, you know, I've competed from 198 all the way up to, you know, 308. I think once I competed as super heavyweight. So big difference, man. So sometimes sumo felt way better than conventional. Sometimes the vice versa. Sometimes I needed to use if I was fatter than normal, I had to move out my conventional stance a little bit more than when I was a little bit less fat. I don't know if I want to say leaner, but just less fat. I would have put those in there and spoke more to other people that were deadlifting way more than me. So it's that, those would be the things where a lot of the progress that I made in the squat, bench, and stuff like that, a lot of that stuff came from, yes, the environment that I was in for one thing, but some of the other stuff came from just speaking to other people that loved fucking squatted more than I did. Like, well, have you ever thought about doing this? You do this? Like, fuck, I never thought of that. You know, I never did that. I never did that with the deadlift because I didn't like it. I had no interest in even having the conversation. So those would be the things that I would put in there for that. Do I have any hobbies that don't involve training? What's the favorite thing that you do outside the weight room? I don't. Never have. That's just me. So it's always been a very high priority on my list. You know, after that, work and family. Be completely honest with you, I don't have a whole lot of time for much else than that. And I'm fine with that. Completely cool with that. Everything I need is right there. So perfect. What is your favorite Waylon song and why? So we're going a little off of the training right now. Do you like any other outlaw country? Seeing you in a Waylon hat is always great. My favorite Waylon Jennings song would be I've Always Been Crazy. It's one of my favorite songs since I was a fucking kid. You know, other artists that fall into the outlaw type of country would be Hank Jr., Chris Ledoux, kind of in that. But I say kind of because I'm not too sure if it falls into that outlaw country. I don't know exactly what that definition is. But then more Southern rock type stuff like Black Snake, Leonard Skinner, Molly Hatchet. I mean, that's all shit that I grew up on. So okay, so where are we on time, Owen?
We are sitting right at about 2 hours and a minute.
Holy shit. All right. Is there any super chat comments?
Yeah, we do have a couple. We did get $5 from Winchester. And pull this up real quick. So in a 12-week program, how often would you rotate in or out the SSB bar, squatting twice per week?
I assume that you're speaking conjugate. So I'm not sure of the context, but let's say 4 weeks. So 4 of the weeks. So if it's more of a linear approach, then you're going to be working more towards specificity as the meet comes closer. So as you get closer to that meet, then you're going to want the straight bar. So then you could do that first phase with the SS yoke bar and then, phase it out to increase that specificity moving forward. If it's more of a conjugate approach, then it can be put in, for a 3-week pendulum wave, in the earlier times, and maybe during a phase in the middle of the prep. If your shoulders start getting beat up or bicep tendons start getting beat up, you can put a short little 3-week phase in there of that. I don't want to say as a deload, but just kind of take some of that stress off there and put it in that way. Or it could just be rotated in, every 3-4 weeks as a max effort exercise and kind of go from that. I'm going to rip through some of these other ones here pretty quick. The reason why I'm not spending a whole lot of time on the super chats, I've always been transparent with you guys, is over the period of doing these lives, we've seen the super chat revenue go from like an average of $200, which definitely helps, because it helps absorb a lot of the cost of the podcast, down to like 15, so it's to be transparent, it's pulling super chats and just only engaging in the super chats makes for a shittier podcast when we go to push it as a podcast, because the context isn't the same as going off of the other questions. So that's why I'm not going towards that. I'll have to decide moving forward when we come back for the next season if I want to do lives at all, so that's something that we're going to consider moving forward. I didn't know I've been yapping for this long, so I'm going to just do some quick Q&As through this and then wrap it up. So under the bar, what is the moment that you knew EliteFTS is the work that you wanted to do, was your passion, or at least what you wanted to do professionally? That's a long business question right there. I don't know if I'm going to be good at anything else. I don't know how good I am at this, so, I mean, fuck, we're 24 years into this, which is awesome. Right. So I have great staff. I got staff that have been with me for over a decade, other ones that are just, new into the process. And, so it's a testament to them that we've lasted this long. There's a lot of things I still haven't figured out, the content being one, so, I have a love-hate relationship with it. Let's put it that way. So I don't know, like, there are other ones in there, like, I don't know how to go about, this isn't, it's like one of those questions, like, did you ever expect EliteFTS to be what it is now? Actually, I expected it to be way more than it is now. So it's, it's yes and no type of thing. When did I know it's what I wanted to do? My passion is, if you've listened to this whole podcast, I'm pretty sure you can figure out where that is, just on tonality and how I talk and what I talk about. So it's pretty easy to see where that is. It just so happens to be my passion doesn't generate any money, which is helping people for free. So it's, I have to rely on you guys to be able to, support us, to allow me to do what I really want to do, which is that. So that's where it becomes very complex on how to make it work. So that was a little longer than what I thought. So, with this one here is talking about, older guys training and younger guys training, and, how strength sports have evolved over the years. And, what do you think is the biggest benefit, somebody coming into the sport, what they should take from that? So I think people coming into the sport now, or any of the strength sports now, what they need to look at is a lot of things have definitely changed over the past 30, 40 years, 20 years even, as far as, powerlifting, strength training, all the other kind of things. Some things have come and gone. Some things are cyclical, so they'll come back again and kind of go again just because that's the way it is. Other things have kind of changed. But the biggest factor when you're talking about people that make their way into the top 10%, 5%, or whatever it's going to be, is the ability to learn how to auto-regulate and train themselves. So if you look through all of those, or if you get a chance to speak to anybody that is at that level or was at that level and talk to them about their training, you're going to find one commonality above everything else. At some point in time, they just figured out what the fuck they had to do for themselves. Now they figure that out through trial and error, and they figure it out through, you know, different people that they talk to, other lifters that they trained with, you know, so it still comes down to that trial and error thing. So that's the biggest component. So what I don't know, you know, moving forward into the future is more and more lifters coming into the sport are relying on coaches, which is not a bad thing because they can help you avoid a lot of the mistakes that you may make in the earlier years, you know, to kind of get the trajectory going right a little bit sooner. So it's not a bad thing, but it becomes a bad thing when you need to start learning what works for you and doesn't work for you on your own, because they're removing that. Most of them are. They're removing that just because they're sending you stock template programs and shit like that. They're not teaching you how to train yourself, you know? So, you know, from a personal training standpoint, I saw that when I was working as a personal trainer as well, just working with Gen Pop. They become dependent upon what you're telling them to do. Well, what the fuck happens when you leave? They just quit training. So are you doing a service or a disservice? In my mind, with the clients I had, I'm doing a fucking disservice. If I'm not training them to be able to know how to train themselves, I am doing a huge disservice. And that's from day one. So, you know, as a new lifter coming into the sport, keep that in mind. You know, press the people, ask questions, try to learn what works for you, what doesn't work for you. Always be on the lookout for, you know, new content, new information that can help. Obviously, you know, EliteFTS is a great source of that, and kind of move from there with that in mind, if that's where you want to go. Now, if you always want to be dependent upon somebody else, hire a coach, and you're very unlikely to ever get to that top 10% if that's the route that you always do. So at some point in time, you're going to have to learn how to figure shit out for yourself. Now, you can still have a coach, mentor, consultant, or whatever it is later down the line to be able to bounce ideas off of, which is what everybody's done since basically the dawn of time. It's just we're moving into this weird ass age where the only way that's going to happen is if you pay somebody for it. So that's the thing that's changed the most over what I've seen with those years. Move through here. I talked about the shaking on the squats. Where do I think powerlifting will be in 5 years? That get asked a lot, so I just keep answering it the same way. That's not up to me to decide, man. That's up to the lifters to decide. What I do like about what I'm seeing and what has changed over the last 10, 15, 20 years, more and more as time goes by, the lifters have become more and more involved into expressing their voice to what they want to see done. And they're voting with where they compete and the federations they compete in. They're voting with their dollars and where they compete way more than they were before. So, and there's pros and cons to having multiple federations. You know, the pros are the lifters have a way to say, fuck you, I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to go somewhere else, and have every right to be able to do that. And normally it's not the federation, but meet directors. Whereas, you know, if it was limited on the number of places that they could go compete, then they actually have a little bit less of a voice but that's in the past. What I see now is more and more the lifters are starting to, it's easier for them to communicate because of social media. So they're able to express their ideas and to communicate with each other on what they want to see done, and then be able to put that out, and then the standard changes, you know. So it's still got a ways to go with this, and again, in my opinion, it's got a ways to go with this, but I see it going there. So it doesn't matter what I say. I would even go as far as to say, it doesn't matter what I say. It doesn't matter what a meet director says. It doesn't matter what any federation president, vice president, or whatever says. None of that matters. What matters is what the lifters fucking want and what they think should be done and how they think they should be treated, and, you know, how meet should, all that kind of stuff. It all falls on them. And right now, I think they have more control, which still isn't enough. Again, in my opinion, still not enough, but they're gaining that traction to have enough control that the future of it will actually be in their hands. It already is now. They just haven't figured it out yet. I'm just wondering if you know who Ricky Dale Crane is and what you think about him. He's one of the OGs. Yes, I know who Ricky Dale Crane is. I don't know if his content's still up online, but he had a ton of fucking content out there. Knows what he's doing. You know, he's a fucking legend in the sport, man. Look him up. Look up his credentials. I mean, the dude's a fucking hell of a lifter, man. He knows a lot about training. You know, I sat in one of his seminars that he did in Swiss. I've only talked to him maybe a couple times in my whole life. I guess you could say we were kind of competitors. Thinking back on it now, I guess we really weren't. But I have nothing bad to say about him. I don't know him that well, but I respect the fuck out of what he did for powerlifting. I respect what he did on the platform. So there's that. What's the one set that you've done post-retirement that you remember the most? That would be, after my first hip replacement, I wanted to squat 800 pounds, not the reverse band, just my regular high box, you know, with the spider bar. That was something that took a couple of years to be able to prep for. And I planned it out for about that time period, or templated it out for that time period. I'm probably more proud of that than anything I ever did on the platform. How does one learn to train more intuitively? Already talked about that. How do you handle yourself when interacting with people who have no integrity, assuming that you don't have a choice but to interact with them? What makes you think that the people that you're interacting with now that you think have integrity actually have integrity? Let me repeat that. What makes you think the people you're communicating with now who you think have integrity actually do? And before you answer that, I want you to think back. I don't know how old you are, but I want you to think back on your life and think really, really close, really, really hard here for a minute, and tell me, who are the people that have hurt you the most? Who are the people that you've got the most angry with? Now, were those people that you trusted 100% before it? Were they people that you thought had great integrity? I'm going to bet they all were. The people that can hurt you the most are the ones closest to you. And I'm not saying this to be an asshole or to be a dick or anything of that sort. I'm just saying it as truth, you know, as fact, you know. So you can spend way too much time worrying about the person that's on the outside, that's an associate that you might not really get along with. In my experience, those people that you might have disagreements with or see things from different views, completely different views sometimes, you know, debatable, heated different views sometimes, end up being the people that you can actually trust the most when it comes to business and anything like that, because their cards are on the table. You know, they're hiding anything. So I can probably speak on this one for way too long, but just ask yourself those questions there before you start, you know, thinking about that, you know. And integrity it's a weird word anyhow, but I get what you're saying. So I would just say back up and kind of look at it from a little bit different perspective and see what that ends up being. Some of the best friends, closest people, the people in my inner circle that I have, which isn't a lot, were people that I've had some of the biggest disagreements with and issues with that we had to work through. They know where I'm coming from. I know where they're coming from. And that's what created that better relationship, you know. So there's that. Recently hammered through Under the Bar and They Are Not Angry Birds article. I choked up on the take care of him promise. What would you say is your best lessons that your kids have taught you outside of the gym? The story that you're talking about was both of my boys were adopted. And when we were there for the birth of both, for the first one, when we left, the birth mother looked at me and made me promise to take care of him. And I wrote about this in the book. And it's the point I was making in the book was, sometimes the person that can make the biggest difference in your life will be somebody that, how do I want to frame that? I need the book to be able to say it. I wrote it way better than what I'm trying to phrase this right now, is so the people that you never expect. You know, it might be somebody that can't rub two dimes together, you know, but they trust you to raise their child. Think about that for a minute, you know, so that's a huge thing when you start catching yourself judging people, you know, for who they are, what they do, maybe what their actions are, you know. So if I catch myself judging people, you know, I think back to that. And that's not the, I mean, that's a big lesson there in itself before all that. But I've talked a little bit about the lessons that my kids, and the biggest one would definitely be patience, would be that. One more page we'll rip through. I already did that one. So that was Brian's, and I already did that one. Cool. So we are going to wrap this thing up. Guys, thank you.
So if you do any kind of pull, if you're doing a pull, even if you're pulling through the transverse plane, like a row where you're kind of abducted at 90 degrees, there's still some lats in that. Like they still pull on the humerus, right? So if you're doing a row, you pull the arms behind the body, you're gonna get the traps, you're gonna get the lats. So they're still getting stimulus.